Hi, it's Tarrant.
And Stella from Meeple University on the Dice Tower.
Today we'll be teaching you how to play The Hobbit, An Unexpected Party, game designed by Jarrett Gray and Ian Luxmore and published by Weta Workshop.
Hopefully you'll be able to play the game straight away after watching this video. Now let's get to the table.
The Hobbit, An Unexpected Party is set at the beginning of J.R.R. Tolkien's famous novel The Hobbit. Mild-mannered hobbit Bilbo Baggins is minding his own business in his Bag End home when it is suddenly invaded by a raucous band of misbehaving dwarves who throw a party and try to convince Bilbo to come on their quest. In the story, the dwarves sing a boisterous song about how they're going to run around and ransack Bilbo's house, although in the end, of course, they don't really mean it. In this game, you will recreate the arrival of the dwarves and the singing of that song. Once the full song has been sung, or once Thorin, the leader of the dwarves, has arrived, the game is over, and the player who has gained the most victory points during the game is the winner. To set up the game, place the board in the centre of the table and place a 2 victory point token onto each of the 15 song spaces around the outside of the board. Keep all of the 1 point tokens off to the side ready for use. Shuffle the purple party cards and the orange bag end cards and place them in their respective spaces. Find the grey Thorin card and place it face down on the blue card space. Then shuffle the remaining 12 blue dwarf cards and place them on top. Flip one dwarf face up into each of these 3 spaces. Mix all of the item tiles up in the item bag and then place 7 at random as follows. 3 go onto the kitchen shelf spaces and then 1 each go on the floor of the kitchen, the parlour, the entrance hall and the pantry. Place the Bilbo standee in the entrance hall, and place the Gandalf standee in the garden. Each player takes a player board, a dwarf card drawn at random from the top of the dwarf deck, the corresponding dwarf standee, and 2 party cards drawn at random from the deck. All players' dwarf standees are placed in the garden with Gandalf. Check to see which player has the lowest numbered dwarf, and that player will go first. You're now ready to play. The aim of the game is to earn points, and points are gained in 2 main ways. The first is by recreating the dwarves' song. Players must move their dwarves around to gain cards, gain items, and sing the song. This requires playing a card in its matching room and dropping its matching item. The second is to collect sets of matching dwarves, as each dwarf has 2 friends which will score extra points if you collect them all. All of this is too much for your unwitting host Bilbo, who is increasingly stressed by all of the dwarves ransacking his house, and who will move around from room to room during the game, cleaning up your mess. Bilbo's mood towards your dwarf during the game is represented by the concept of curious and furious. During the game, many actions you take will require you to gain curious, which means to take one of the curious Bilbo tokens and place it onto one of these 5 steps of your player board. This represents a level of interest or concern from Bilbo about the mess you're making. Once all of your curious spaces are filled, anytime you gain curious in the game, you flip one of these tokens over to the red furious side. Bilbo is now increasingly angry with your dwarf's conduct. Curious has no real effect on your game, but furious occupies the spaces on your player board where you can hold items. As Bilbo gets more and more furious with you, you will have to start dropping items. Some effects in the game allow you to remove curious, which either lets you flip a furious back to a curious, or discard a curious token. So now that we understand that core mechanic, let's look through the main turn sequence for the game. A player's turn takes place over 6 phases, shown at the top of your player board. These phases are distract, move, pick up, action, discard, and clean up. The active player goes through each of these 6 steps in sequence before play passes to the next player who does likewise. Players continue taking turns in this manner around the table until the end of the game is triggered. First, you may distract Bilbo. In this optional step, you may gain 1 curious in order to move Bilbo into your current room. The second step is to move, and you must move your dwarf standee to a new circular action space anywhere on the board. You may move any distance to any room. The only restrictions are that you cannot stay in the space where you already are, and you cannot move to a space in Bilbo's current room. This is why you may want to distract Bilbo at the start of your turn, to move him away from the room where you wish to move. You may choose to move to a space already containing another dwarf if you wish. This is called barging. The displaced dwarf simply goes to the general area in that room, and the dwarf that does the barging gains 1 curious. The third step is pick up, and this applies only if you moved into the room where Gandalf is currently located. If this is the case, then you may pick up 1 item that has been dropped on the floor of that room and add it to your player board. You skip this phase of your turn if Gandalf is not in your room or if there are no items on the floor. Then the fourth step is to take your action. There are 4 types of action spaces on the board: doors, sing, hustle, and sit. At a door space, you gain the benefit printed above the door. So here, 3 party cards. Here, 2 party cards and an item drawn at random from the bag. Here, it's 1 item taken off the kitchen shelf. This is immediately replenished with a new item from the bag. Here, it's to take 3 random items from the bag, but at the cost of gaining 2 curious. And here, it's gaining 2 items from the bag, and all players, including you, gain 1 curious. To take a sing action, go through the following steps. First, reveal a party card from your hand. Refer only to the top half of the card. You must be in the room that is shown on the card. Then take the corresponding item from your player board and drop it onto the floor of the room you're in. In the case of this card, drop any 3 items. And in the case of this card, simply gain 3 curious. Next, find that line of the song, as indicated by its number, on the outside of the board. If nobody has sung this line of the song before, then take the 2 victory point token and slot the song card underneath the board. Add any points token you gain to the top of your points stack. If you sing a line of the song which has been sung before, then take a 1 point token into your stack and discard the card to the discard pile. Then, as indicated by this icon, draw an orange bag end card. These cards will resolve a few random effects for the players to deal with. The top row always results in the player who took the action gaining 1 or 2 curious. The second row moves Bilbo and or Gandalf around the house. And note that every time you move Gandalf to a new room, he drops an item at random from the bag on the floor of that room. And the third row is a random effect which may impact all dwarves in the game. The hustle action allows the active player to play a party card and then resolve the text effect shown at the bottom of the card. This will be some tactical effect which will help the player in the game. The active player then discards the card that was played and draws a new card from the deck to replace it. The final action, present only in the dining room, is to sit. When a player takes this action, go through the following steps. First, all players, excluding the player taking the action, gains 1 point into their point stacks. The standee of the dwarf taking the action is placed into one of the seats in the dining room. The player will not be taking actions with that dwarf any longer. The player then chooses a new dwarf from the 3 face-up dwarves and immediately replenishes from the draw deck. The player places their new dwarf card on top of their old one and discards any curious or furious currently on their board. Any items or points tokens are retained. Finally, the new dwarf standee is placed into the garden ready for next turn. In this way, taking the sit action achieves two things. It allows you to clear out your board and open up your item spaces again when you've got too much Furious, and it lets you collect your sets of dwarves that you need to score extra points at the end of the game. Additionally, each dwarf has a special bonus ability, and you may want to level up to a different ability or one which is more strategically beneficial at this point in the game. Be warned though that your opponents do gain points every time you take this action, and so you'll need to make sure you're taking sensible choices which are overall profitable. The fifth phase of the turn is the discard phase, and if you have drawn above 3 party cards during the turn, then you must discard down to 3, discarding the cards of your choice. Finally, there is the cleanup phase, and if there is any room on the board which has 4 or more items dropped on the floor, then move Bilbo into that room, clean up all of the dropped items by picking them up and returning them to the bag, and each dwarf currently in that room gains 1 Curious. The player's turn is then over and play passes to the next player clockwise. A few other quick rules. A player may take items above their capacity as long as they immediately drop the excess into the room where they're currently standing. If a dwarf ever gets a 5th Furious, then Bilbo is truly enraged. That player must discard the top points token on their point stack, whether it's a 1 or a 2, and then that dwarf has no choice but to take the sit action on the next turn. Finally, many rules in the game refer to rooms, particularly rules where you interact with either Bilbo or Gandalf. For these purposes, neither the garden nor the front door are considered rooms, and similarly these effects do not apply to the dining room. Neither Bilbo nor Gandalf ever enter the dining room, and the sit space is never impeded. The end of the game may be triggered in one of 2 ways. Either by the final line of the song being sung, or by a player choosing the Thorin card as part of a sit action. Thorin is always the last dwarf in the dwarf deck, but does not need to be the last dwarf chosen. Each player, excluding the one who triggered the end of the game, has 1 more turn. Then proceed to final scoring. Each dwarf that you've collected, including your final dwarf, could gain up to 2 bonus points if you have the matching dwarves. So here, Gloin gains 1 point for Oin and 1 point for Thorin. Oin gains 1 point for Gloin and 1 for Thorin, and so on. In the specific case of Nori, the player loses 1 point for also having Dori. These are then added to the points already in the player's points stack, and the player with the highest score wins. In the event of a tie, victory is shared.
And that's how to play The Hobbit, an unexpected party. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed this video, please help us by hitting that like button and subscribe to the Dice Tower if you haven't already done so.
And if you have any questions, comments or feedback, please write them in the comment section below.
Until next time!